Hello there, and welcome to Talking Nerdy, the show where we take various story arcs and events from comics and we cover them. I'm your host, Obi-Wan Jabroni. Now, our story this week will be Spawn issues 314 through 317, The Chain Gang. Written by Todd McFarlane, with arts by Carlo Berardi, and colors by J. David Ramos. Now, this is the last story arc in Spawn before a whole new event kicks off in Spawn's universe. Now, we was previously left off in Spawn during the Cult of Omega story arc, and it left us with Spawn and Overkill traveling to a mysterious island to face off against a powerful foe. Unbeknownst to them, he was waiting. So, with all that, let's start talking nerdy. Kicking off today's story, we have Spawn number 314, The Chain Gang Part 1. Now, we open on a mysterious island that Spawn and Overkill traveled to in the previous issue, where they was attacked by a hulking new Hellspawn named Monolith. Now, we open up and Monolith charges and tackles Spawn, and tells him that he's lucky that he can't kill him because the Master wants him alive. And Monolith starts pounding and bashing on Spawn with ease until he is unconscious and he throws him over his shoulder, and together they walk off into the ocean. Now, we switch over to a military base, and Spawn and Monolith have arrived there, and Spawn is still knocked out cold. And Monolith hands him off to some soldiers who clamp him onto a upright table and put a gas mask-like helmet on him with chemical tubes on it. And they put that on his head. And we learn that the chemical is that it's a sonar chemical helmet that disrupts Spawn's powers and keeps him captive. And Monolith tells Spawn that soon his master will cleanse the world and all Hellspawn will kneel down before him. And as he says this, he puts his face right up in Spawn's, and Spawn headbutts the piss out of him. Monolith is pissed and yells that it was a mistake, and he knocks Spawn back out again and puts a bag over his head. Now, we switch and we're in a big open field up on the surface of the island. Excuse me. And Spawn awakes suspended by shackles in front of a massive, at least 30, 40 foot tall Hellspawn that has horns. And we learn that his name is the Omega Spawn, and he is Monolith's master. Now, at this point, he gives a pretty long descriptive speech of who he is and what's going on that I'm just going to read directly for you here. I thought you to be more resilient than this. It's why so many precautions are placed, but look at you, how weak you are. I thought by now you have learned how to ration your powers, not deplete them so foolishly. Was the clown worth all that? He never was to me, though the bigger question is why? What was your plan? Did you really think that ripping a hole open just to get rid of the clown and God's agents would have consequences? Were you mad? Dozens of Hellspawns have been hunted and killed doing what they were ordered to. None of them never panicked, like you did. The point of acting so recklessly, they couldn't reverse the damage they created. What you did, detonating your symbiote, there's no going back from that. I've tried already. It's not reversible. We're all imprisoned on this planet. All of us. Even those that want nothing to do with it. But if I'm going to be stuck here, then by God, I'm going to rule it. Every inch of it. So please tell me you have at least some sense of what would happen. Do you really think that you would be able to contain the fallout? And at this point, Spawn answers, I knew. A few might fall through the hole. A few? It wasn't a few, it was hundreds of us. And not just Hellspawn, everything poured from those fissions, and now each of them is either confused, mad, or planning now to become the new king, the ruler of Earth and any other piece of this dimension they can get their hands on. You've unleashed a chaos that never gets under control, never again. Everyone with any craving to dominate will die trying to show you they should be the dominant one. regardless where any were born, heaven, hell, earth, they're all going to try to annihilate their competition. And it already began. Let me show you one of the first traitors. One who was always lusting for more than he deserved, craving to attain what he'll never have, that to sit like me on the throne that commands fear. Every spawn that ever lived, he tried to con, wanting them to believe that they needed his help, when the only thing he was after was their symbiote, their power. I don't care who conquered the Earth, there will be far more planets than that have far more value to rape. That's exactly what I was doing when you tore open time. I was minutes from my victory. Instead, I got vaporized, landing in some ravaged jungle, needing to recover. The fishermen I saw delivered me to this island. I killed them, of course, but they served their purpose by helping me. But Calistro found me, wanting to steal my powers. Then he didn't stand a chance. Jumping around the time, all those centuries must have done something to his mind. But I didn't kill him. You know why? Because somewhere in his brain there's knowledge that's been hidden. Knowledge that I can use. Unfortunately, he's not quite willing to share that info yet, despite all his torture. So down a hole, 1,000 feet deep, you'll find a weak, pitiful old man cowering in some corner. Which brings us to Spawn, to why you're here. You know that Calistro helped create the first Spawn symbiote costume. He even tried wearing it for a time before Malbolgia stripped it from him because he couldn't be trusted. Unfortunately, he's slowly losing his grip with reality, so I need those secrets now. Now, after he says all this, Omega Spawn reaches out and grabs Spawn, ripping him from the shackles and blasting him with a plasma blast before throwing him to the ground, saying, "Now crawl to that hole and get me what I want." Now, at that moment, from out of nowhere, a sword flies and goes into Omega's back of Omega Spawn's leg, and he turns as the medieval Spawn charges to save Spawn, ending our first issue. Taking us into Spawn number 315, The Chain Gang Part 2. Now, we open with medieval Spawn plunging his sword into Omega Spawn's right eye and kicking off of his face to land on the ground as Omega falls to his knees. And medieval Spawn reaches out his hand and the sword rips from Omega's eye and returns to it. And as Omega starts to stand, medieval runs over to Spawn's side and tells him to hurry and grab the sword. He knows what's coming next as he plunges the tip of his sword into the ground. Now, at this point, Omega starts to use his powers, making a huge vacuum of wind, sucking everything around them towards him. And Medieval loses his grip on the sword and starts to get sucked in, but Spawn grabs onto his hand and he tells Spawn to release him, that it's their only chance. And Spawn does, and Medieval goes flying at Omega, and he uses his cape to latch onto Omega's head, completely blinding him and flipping over top of his head to hang from behind. Spawn lets go of the sword, and as he's flying towards Omega, his arms grow 10 giant bladed spikes, and he plunges them into the blinded Omega's chest and flips off onto the ground. Omega finally gets a hold of Medieval and rips the cape and him off his head and sends them crashing into Spawn. Medieval hurries and tells Spawn that they need to retreat, and he says that no, he has a plan. And at this point, he tells Medieval that while Monolith was taking him through the ocean, he infected him, and that now he has complete control over the Monolith. And as it's explained, Monolith comes up from out of nowhere, grabbing Omega's chains from behind and pulling him backward, making him fall to the ground yet again. And it don't last very long. He starts to stand almost immediately, building energy in one of his hands. And at that point, Medieval Spawn lunges at him, cuts off his hand, causing the energy to scatter all across the battlefield, hitting various points. One of these energy bolts hit right at Monolith, and Spawn tries to tackle him to the side, but he don't get it too late. It hits Monolith and kills him instantly. Spawn runs over to Medieval's side after this, as Omega starts to stand once again. And Omega raises his hand, saying that that he thought Spawn could be useful in breaking Calistro, but he was wrong. Spawn is just like Cog. He's weak. And he triggers a sonic trap that's on the island, so intense that Spawn and Medieval feel like their entire bodies are about to explode. And over the sonic noise, none of them hear another wail that starts coming from the pit that holds Cog. And out of that pit rises a black ooze that forms into a new hellspawn that's all black with spikes and red eyes and mouth and spawn symbol. And that ends our issue. Leading us into Spawn number 316, the Chang Gang Part 3. Now, we open with the new Hellspawn crawling out of the pit that holds Cog, and we learn that his name is Plague Spawn. And Plague starts to walk over to Spawn and Medieval, who are being hit by the Omega's sonic blasts. And Omega raises his fist to try to bring it down and crush Medieval and Spawn. And as he slams his fist down, a red barrier appears, blocking his fist and making the Sonics stop. And Omega turns to see Plague standing nearby on some rubble. Plague screams, releasing a sonic scream of his own that only seems to affect the Omega Spawn. And while this is happening, Spawn and Medieval have started to recover. And they are attacked by some of Omega's soldier goons. Over with Plague and Omega, Plague has stopped his scream, and Omega starts to question who he is and says that he is nothing and he can't kill Omega. Plague just stares at him as Omega slams his fist down towards him. He barely misses, and Plague continues to just stare, now levitating just above where Omega's fist crashed into the rubble. At this point, Omega looks at him and quickly reaches out, grabbing him and crushing him into the palm of his hand. He smiles, thinking he won, when a green hellspawn energy starts crackling around his fist, and black spikes shoot out through all of his hand. He screams, throwing Plague to the side, and starts building a massive energy in his good hand. It builds to a massive size, and he slams it to the ground, causing a massive blast to shoot straight up into the sky and into space itself. Now, at this point, we switch back to Spawn in Mark's hideout, and She-Spawn enters to find that everyone is gone. And she looks over at the computers, and she sees the massive Hellspawn energy registering on their monitors, and she rushes out to try to find Mark in the facility, ending this third issue. Taking us into our final issue, Spawn number 317, the Chang Gang Part 4. Now, we open with Omega Spawn telling Medieval and Spawn that they will never leave this island alive. And we see Spawn and Medieval using their capes to protect themselves from the blast that is still destroying this island around them. And we also learn that Omega's blast hasn't only destroyed this island and sent waves after our spawns, but it is also causing worldwide earthquakes. Now, he starts to take his blast down. It starts to come to an end, and Spawn takes advantage of this distraction, and he grabs Medieval's sword and lunges at Omega, stabbing him over and over again in the back of the head. And Medieval just stares in awe as Omega collapses to the ground, landing face first. And Spawn tells Medieval that they need to find this new Hellspawn right now. And as Medieval's telling Spawn that Omega threw him to the northeast, they start to hear a rumble behind them. And they turn to see the Omega Spawn standing with a huge chunk of rock raised above his head. And he slams it down where Spawn and Medieval stood moments before. And as Omega lifts the rock, he sees only Medieval's crushed shield laying under it. And as he looks around, some chains burst from the ground and wrapped around Omega's throat. Spawn and Medieval both use the chains to try to pull Omega down, but they can't get the leverage they need. And out of nowhere, black tendrils shoot out from behind Omega, wrapping up his legs, and Plague comes out of the shadows. And as Omega starts to fall, Spawn tells Medieval to cut off his head when he lands. But before he can, Plague pulls the now screaming Omega back towards him and into the pit where Cog and him came from. Spawn and Medieval approach the now silent pit, and it starts to crumble and fall, filling in the hole. Medieval tells Spawn that he knows that he don't trust him, but he is getting Spawn home. Then Spawn needs to help him, and they both leave. And we switch to down in the pit, and it's all dark, and we see Omega getting pulled in by Plague. And down at the bottom, we see Cog sitting in the shadows, all nasty and beat up. And he smiles, saying, "It's finally begun." And that ends our story. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Join us next week where we cover Star Wars War of the Bounty Hunters Chapter 1. You can find the Preludes chapter to that story on our channel right now. Be sure to check it out before next week. As always, thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Feedback is always welcome. You can also find us on the Jabroni Nerd Network Facebook page and on Twitter at Jabroni Nerd. Until next week, stay sweaty and keep talking nerdy, guys.